To those of you who are joining our webinar today, we're going to just wait a couple of minutes, maybe about 1 or 2 minutes for others who may be joining us, and then we will start our webinar. Okay, I think we'll begin today's session. Again, I'd like to welcome all of you who have joined us today for our webinar titled Workers' Comp 101, Understanding How to Control Costs. Our featured guest speaker today is Mike Fetting. Mike is a loss prevention specialist with State Fund Mutual, the work comp experts. Your hosts today are Aaron Green, president of the Wisconsin Educators Risk Management Cooperative, also known as WRMIC. Aaron is director of business with the Greendale School District. Unfortunately, Aaron was not able to be with us today, so I'm substituting for her. My name is Dan Vandewater. I'm the executive director of business with the Eau Claire School District. Also hosting the program today is Kathy Johnson. Kathy is the principal consultant with Risk Management Strategies, also known as RMS, and she is the independent consultant to WRMIC. Just a few words about WRMIC. It's a 660301 that was formed last July by the Eau Claire, Hayward, and Greendale school districts. The goal of the consortium is to improve insurance purchasing power through education, the implementation of best practices, and leveraging premium volume. WRMIC has partnered with a team of proven providers, State Fund Mutual. State Fund Mutual serves approximately 140 school districts for their worker compensation needs. RJF, a Marsh & McLennan agency, and Community Insurance Corporation, which serves a number of school districts in Wisconsin. I've mentioned that Kathy is WRMIC's independent consultant. She is independent because RMS accepts no commissions or fees from brokers, agents, or insurance companies, and that's a very important point to note. She also assists districts, or has been assisting districts, with insurance and risk management issues since 1996. She has experience in forming insurance cooperatives. She has extensive claims adjusting and corporate risk management experience, which translates very nicely into the public sector. And she also serves as, or has served as, past director of the Wisconsin Safety Council. Just a housekeeping item. We certainly encourage questions as Mike is presenting his material. To do that, please use the question tab on the Go to Webinar display, which should be showing on your screen. So with that, and without further delay, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Kathy Johnson. Kathy?
Thank you, Dan. Welcome, everyone. Those of you who have listened before have heard me say that when the districts that came to me wanting to form a new cooperative and wanting an independent consultant to guide it, I realized that I needed to find insurance providers that would offer the resources of a national broker and give the districts the best of all worlds. So besides the oversight of the independent consultant, we have the broad resources of RJF agencies. RJF agencies has on-staff consultants to help with ensuring and providing exceptional service on the workers' compensation. In fact, their claims consultant will be presenting our next webinar step 2 to saving costs and workers' compensation on February 9th. We also have broad liability coverage from a carrier with a 9-year history of no rate increases and what I consider to be the broadest coverage available to school districts. The WMIC co-op also offers low membership dues, yet without sacrificing any services. I'd worked with the RJF agencies on a few districts over the past couple of years, and I was impressed with their expertise and their proactive services. RJF worked with me to choose State Fund Mutual, or SFM, our work comp carrier. As Dan mentioned, they insure currently 140 school districts in Minnesota, and with beginning to insure the WMIC schools, has begun to insure districts in Wisconsin. SFM was founded in 1983 as a member-owned mutual insurance company, and it grew rapidly to become Minnesota's largest work comp insurer. It offers workers' comp solutions, including claims and disability management, cost containment, and legal assistance. Our speaker today is Mike Fetting, who works for SFM as a loss prevention specialist. Mike's role is to help policyholder clients prevent work-related injuries and establish a safety culture. Mike's hands-on approach includes safety training, accident trend analysis, and ergonomic analysis. Since 2004, he's worked extensively with a wide variety of service, manufacturing, retail, health-related industries, and schools. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he's earned his Associate Safety Professional designation. Mike's collaborative style and diverse experience help his clients achieve one of their most important goals, which is to achieve a safe workplace for their employees, and which ultimately leads to saving costs. Mike, if you would begin your presentation.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Workers' Comp 101. Today I'm going to be covering what is workers' comp, what are we dealing with, how much does it cost, or what kind of expenses can you expect. Hopefully I'll be able to communicate what's in it for you, why should you care about what I'm talking about, and what can you do about it. I'll move on to some targets and tactics for handling those targets, and then lastly cover creating safety culture. So what is workers' compensation? It's basically insurance. So we talk about workers' comp insurance, and it is insurance, I guess, a little bit like car insurance. You pay a premium, and your insurance company pays for any claims that you might have. I'll talk a little bit about the expenses later on because it's not really built like car insurance, but operationally there's a premium and there's claims. And what do those claims pay? They will pay for medical costs associated with a workplace injury and for wage replacement if a person is no longer able to work for a short period of time. And in some cases, it'll pay for vocational rehabilitation. And where that comes in is if an employee can no longer do their normal job. Let's say you have a custodian who is unable to stand for extended periods of time and can no longer ever be a custodian again. In some certain cases, there may be a couple-year period of vocational rehabilitation. It's not on my slide here, but there's also something called permanency, and there are dollar amounts set aside. If there's a very severe injury, and let's say somebody lost a hand, you may be your insurance company may be liable for a cost such as that. And basically, it was put in place to make the injured person whole again. But that's it. That's basically what it pays for, and it has to be during the scope of work. Sometimes it's very, very obvious. Other times it's not. Your parking lot, as a person is coming into work, is considered the scope of work, even if they're not really at work yet. If a person is traveling between schools and is injured, that's considered during the scope of work. I will talk about cost in a minute, but really the human factors are the biggest part of it for me. Now, we may look at schools and think that, you know, relatively low hazard operations, but I think hopefully we all know that bad things do happen in pretty much all operations. And the human factors are a really big deal, especially in the business I'm in. You know, I see it, I want to say probably monthly. We have enough policyholders that somebody's life has changed. Sometimes it's for the short term. Sometimes it may be for a week or a month or something like that, and you can no longer, lift your kid up off the ground because your back hurts. But for other people, it's for a lifetime, and they will never ever be the same. They won't be able to play with their children or grandchildren, or do their favorite hobby anymore. It's also time management, and that kind of runs into costs here. But as you can imagine, and probably are aware, those investigations and emergencies and paperwork and finding coverage, those all take time. And those are all emergency situations. All of a sudden, it's an unplanned event that you have to deal with right now. And what I'm going to get into a little bit later, hopefully we can switch planned activities for fewer injuries and fewer unplanned emergencies that can be very, very disruptive. So insurance. I talked a little bit about that it's a little bit like car insurance, but it's very different as far as how much your costs are going to be and how they are set. And the way it works in the state of Wisconsin is there is a state set rate for your insurance, and it's based on what you do. So there's an industry class code for teachers, and there's another one for other employees in schools, and it's a certain dollar amount per $100 in payroll, somewhere between 50 cents per $100 to $5 and some change per $100, depending on what the person's doing. It's lower for the teacher level, higher for custodian level, because there's different hazards in those classes. So they do that multiplication, and you come up with a dollar amount. Every school in Wisconsin will pay that same dollar amount based on their payroll. And they figure that's fair because they all have similar hazards. What's unfair about that is some school districts perform very, very well and have very few injuries, but some districts may have many injuries and have a very hard time maintaining a safe workplace and be very expensive to insure. So what the state does to try and make that fair is they multiply that state set rate by something that's called your experience mod. And what your experience mod is, all of your injuries get reported to the state through your insurance carrier. And they take those injuries and they put them into a pretty complex equation. And they compare your results to all the other schools through this equation. And if your results are average, it's an average school, you're just kind of right in the ballpark with everybody else, your experience model will be a 1. And they'll multiply that state set rate by 1, and you will pay the state set rate. If you have very good results, tend to be better than the average, you can move that down, and your state set rate might go down to 0.8 or even 0.6 if you're a big district. And the same is true in the other direction. In the other direction, there's actually no ceiling. There is a floor for everybody. Everybody will pay something. But there is no ceiling. Your experience mod can go up to 2, 3, 4, depending on how bad your injuries might be. And they base this off a 3-year period. So for next fall, the year coming up in 2012, they will be looking at injuries from 2008, 2009, and 2010. All those injuries will go into your experience mod. And I like to think of it as a competition. It's just like, well, you're in competition with the other schools. Either you're average, and we like to think of that as all C's, bring home all C's on your report card, or you're better average than average, or you're worse than average. Maybe kind of like your football teams are competing against each other. You're also competing against each other for your cost of insurance. So here's some mod examples, and I'm going to base it off of kind of a medium-large district, I guess. With a mod of 1, they'd be paying $200,000 in annual cost of insurance. If they can have just a few less injuries than average, they might get down to a 0.9 and save $20,000 every year. And if they could get down to their very lowest mod, now the lowest mod is very difficult to get to because that is absolutely no injuries for a 3-year period. But if they can get close to that, they might be saving $70,000 a year. And you can see that black bar on the other end. A high mod, I used a number of 1.5, which is not that hard to get to if you string several bad years in a row together. paying an extra $100,000 per year. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, that basic insurance cost. Kind of all the safety organizations have different ratios for direct costs and indirect costs. OSHA uses a range of anywhere from 1 to 1 to 20 to 1. Personally, I think 20 to 1 is pretty high. But if you look at the hidden costs, there's time to respond to the injury, maybe disruption of the lesson plan if you bring in a sub. As good as your subs may be, it's still not going to be quite the same as the path your teacher was taking, and there's going to be a whole new relationship building process. Perhaps you get a bad reputation in the community. Your community may not know why there's all of a sudden a bunch of subs, or 3 subs, or 4 or 5 in the district, but they may recognize that, boy, the teachers, we're kind of losing them, and it's a bunch of subs, and that can hurt your reputation. And it can hurt your human relations internally, as teachers may be saying, boy, this is an expensive place to work, or a dangerous place to work. A lot of people are having injuries. But as far as that ratio goes, let me give you an example. Let's say you have a fairly minor eye injury in a shop, and it's a $200 injury to a teacher. Well, that teacher's probably not going to be able to drive themselves to the eye doctor, so now you're going to have another teacher or another employee hop in the car, and they're going to drive together, and it might be a half hour each way, and you might spend an hour or maybe even 2 hours at the eye doctor. And all of a sudden your costs start adding up, and that's how we come up with fairly measurable indirect costs. So here's an example of how losses can affect your rate. So with this slide, I usually talk about your 2011 cost of insurance is currently based off of your losses in 2007, 2008, 2009. Let's assume these blue bars are costs per year. This is nobody in particular. This is just an example. So we've got 2011 cost of insurance based off 2007, 2008, 2009. Now next year, the question is, ask yourselves, will my cost of insurance be going up or down in 2012? A lot of times people will look at this and they'll say, boy, look at the losses in 2011. They were huge, our biggest loss year ever. Obviously, our cost of insurance is going up in 2012. But really, it's not. Not yet, anyway. Because what happens for 2012, 2007 will drop off, which was a big loss year. 2010 will come on, which is a small loss year. So in 2012, 2011 is not really looked at yet. And your insurance will actually go down until the following year, 2013, which will probably really spike. How 2011 will affect you in 2012 is your insurance carriers will look at that, and they may have some thought process about a dividend, which is cash you can earn back on your premium based on your results. And they say, wow, this place is not doing that well right now. I don't think we should really give any dividend or offer a dividend as a possibility for next year, or something to that effect. A little bit about work comp law. It's a no-fault concept. And what that means is it doesn't really matter if the employee broke the rules, did something fairly stupid. You could almost look at them and say, boy, they hurt themselves. They really shouldn't have done that. That doesn't matter. Basically, in general, we still have to pay the claim. On the flip side of that, no-fault concept, you can't really be sued. There is no pain and suffering in workers' comp. There is no, boy, I had a lifetime $30,000 vacation planned. I can't get my money back on it, and I can't go on it. You can't be sued for that $30,000 vacation. You only pay for the medical costs and the lost time costs. You can end up in court, don't get me wrong, but you will end up in court over other items generally, whether it's work-related and the amount of surgery and the amount of maybe permanency required on that claim. Your insurance carrier owes the claim until proven otherwise. We have to be able to prove in a court of law that it did not happen at work. Right? Basically, the employee really doesn't need to prove much. The employee has to come up and say, I was injured at work. they're kind of done. But to be able to deny a claim, we have to be able to prove that it did not happen at work. And the employee collects disability until able to work. A couple things the carrier gets, or the employer got out of this process, was an independent medical examination. The employee can go to a doctor of their choice, but one time, pretty much one time, every 6 months, technically we can send them to a doctor of our choice, but after the first time you have to have more reason. We can send them to a doctor of our choice. That's kind of up to your carrier, and that's to determine, let's say the doctor said they need a fusion, and we think, you know, fusion is a little bit much. Maybe they just need a laminectomy, or maybe they don't need any surgery at all. We can send them to a doctor of our choice to kind of refute what their doctor says. We have access to medical information. We even get access to prior injuries. So HIPAA, the Health Privacy Act, it applies to some extent, right? You're not going to tell everybody in the district what happened to this person and not what they're going through. But as a need-to-know basis for people dealing with the claim, HIPAA does not apply very directly. So an employee gets paid for lost wages, but if you offer them employment, even if they don't take it, they say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to sit home until I heal. If the doctor has given them restrictions and you offer them employment within those restrictions, your work comp carrier should stop their wage loss benefits as long as you notify them, because the employee really doesn't have the right to refuse work and payment. And there are two ways to control your costs of workers' comp insurance. Those are fewer injuries, which is what I'm all about because I do loss prevention. I really prefer the fewer injuries role. But the other piece of it is no lost time cases, which is a very important piece of it too. I have a little demonstration for you here, an example. And let's say there was an employee who hurt their back and they couldn't bend or twist for 1 week, and that meant they couldn't do their normal job. So we have two examples here. One where they came back on light duty, and the other one, which is further to the right, where there was no work available to them and you had them stay home. In both cases, your insurance carrier paid them $1,500 for the medical, not the employee, but they paid the doctor $1,500. In the first case with light duty, we paid the employee nothing. You continued to pay their salary, and they performed some sort of service for you. In the second case, we only paid them $200. And the reason for that is the first 3 days off of work are not paid for. That's the way the statute works. And the other piece of it is an employee only gets 2/3 of their normal pay. So they really didn't get much out of that. Total paid by your insurance carrier, first case $1,500, second case $1,700. The way that affects your premium with the light duty case is your premium will go up, and this is order of magnitude. This is a real example, but it's for a specific account, and every account will be different. Anyway, first case, $930 total over the 3-year period. So it's actually less than the carrier paid for the claim. In the second case, where there was lost time, it's almost $3,500. It's a huge difference just because of that little $200 payment. I'll show you why here. It's got nothing to do with the doctor or the injury. It has to do with whether it's lost time or med only. And if it's med only, before it goes into that large equation I talked about before, 70% of the dollars are not counted. There's a big discount. So a $1,000 injury only looks like $300 if it's med only. And the state set that up to make sure all claims are reported to the state rather than having people self-pay, which used to be a problem quite a few years ago. And that only means that no wage loss benefits are paid to the employee. And that kicks in after 3 days off of work. It doesn't include the day of injury, but it does include Saturdays, even if that's not a normal work day. But the state set it up as a 6-day work week, regardless of what somebody actually works. So if a person was hurt on Tuesday, Tuesday does not count. Wednesday counts, Thursday counts, Friday counts. And let's say you brought them back Monday and you wiped your forehead and you said, whew, brought them back within 3 days. Well, really you didn't, because Saturday counts, even though it was not a normal work day. So that case would be a lost time case. So watch out for that. So my first part of improving results is going to be targets and tactics. And we're going to talk about what we've seen in the school districts, some recognition of very specific hazards and some tactics for dealing with those hazards. So this chart that you see in front of you here is based off of several hundred school districts over a period of just shy of 2 years, and I think it's something like $12 million in premium. And the blue bars are the cost of injuries, and the red line is the number of injuries. I really like looking at targets because this way we can really focus our efforts. Everybody's busy, and we want to focus on where we can really have an impact. If you look at this, fall, slip, trip on ice or snow is clearly #1 cost. This is a really, really big deal for us as an insurance carrier and for schools in general. Very common injury, very expensive injury. But if we look down the line, slip, trip on the same level and go a little further, actually all the way down to the end, fall, slip, or trip, not otherwise classified. So slip, trips, and falls are a really big target for us. And for most schools, I would consider probably a similar target. We've got a couple of different types of strain injuries, lifting and miscellaneous strains. When I looked at the details on these, they're really focused on backs and shoulders. And fellow worker or patient. Now this sounds like a kind of a funny category. And what this is anytime two people come together. So it may be some sort of aggressive behavior, it may be a sports behavior, it might even just be two people running into each other in the hall. And who's getting hurt? When we look at this, custodians have been the most expensive and quite frequent. Teachers are both expensive and frequent. You may notice down at the end here, I've also got a custodial, housekeeping, and paraprofessional and para, which are probably all the same thing. What happens is we have to rely on the way the data is reported to us. So we have one district reported as one explanation, one as another. We could probably put those together. But those are our targets. So let's talk about trip hazards and define those, because there are things we look at every day and they look at and say, boy, that's just normal stuff. That happens everywhere, every place, and usually doesn't cause a problem. These cords that you see here, many of us probably think of them that way. They're actually trip hazards, and we see, as you could see from the slides before, many, many claims based on that type of environment. So for slips and trips, our targets are ice and snow, standing on chairs or tables, those cords I talked about, and wet floors, especially in specific areas and specific times. And just to drive the point home on the cord, so you see this cord in the picture in the lower right. And again, it's easy to say, it's just a cord. Most likely nobody's going to drop a trip on it. Well, think about it. A teacher may pass this cord 20 times a day, 180 times a year, 180 days a year. That's 3,600 times a year. And do it for 10 years, and that's 36,000 times now all of a sudden that cord's being passed by. Eventually it happens. And these are fairly controllable types of hazards. So my message on this type of thing is eventually it happens, it's fairly controllable, and we need to be serious about that sort of thing. But first a little bit on ice and snow, because that's a really, really big one. I really need to push aggressive snow removal. If it's contracted, make sure the language is very explicit as to when they will come. A lot of times, we like to see a 1-inch standard, that there's 1 inch the service is coming in, what time they're going to come in. Some districts will use a pre-treatment or they'll spray a salt solution on the parking lots, and that's really good if there's about a 1 inch of snow or less, so we'll just take it right out. Standards for salting and rechecking your shadows change throughout the day, and make sure somebody's assigned with those standards and expectations, and there's some follow-up and observation, coaching, enforcing, and that sort of thing. And sometimes, probably not quite as often, but sometimes I see places that will have hot routes. This is an area to go, and barriers in areas where we don't expect people to be walking or don't want them to be walking. And slips and trips. Easy access to ladders, standards about standing on chairs, and standing on desks and that sort of thing, and communications of those standards. Sometimes people may not know that they're really not supposed to ever stand on a chair. Where do I go get a ladder? Well, the only ladder is down in maintenance, which is, 1,000 feet away, and it's going to take me quite a while. I'll just stand on a chair. If you can keep a few ladders throughout the building, and so people can share, you can have 5 or 10 different classrooms sharing a ladder, it'll make it much more likely that it'll be used. Zero loose cord standard. Move or tape down all those cords. And slip-resistant shoes. I don't know if you're aware of these, but there is such an animal out there as a slip-resistant shoe. They tend to work very, very well. I have a pair of myself, and it's hard for me sometimes to tell if a floor is slippery when I'm evaluating a place. These could be mandatory for kitchen staff, mandatory for custodial staff, suggested for teachers. They work really well on water and oil. I will say they don't work really well on snow or ice. They really don't provide any benefit there. But water and oil, they work fantastically well. And they're out there. You can Google slip-resistant shoes or look at shoes for crews. They're a common place to go for that type of product. So strength and material handling, our next target. Some of the things that come up here are heavy boxes of paper, moving equipment, generally, like custodial staff type things that are listed there. Kitchen, when you're stocking the kitchen, heavy cans and heavy bags and flour and that sort of thing. Garbage handling and special needs children. And it doesn't matter, whether they're very light and small and docile or very large and maybe a little aggressive. Either one has its own hazards. People don't come with handles, and they can be hard to lift and move and handle. So that's one of our challenges. So some of the tactics. One of the easiest ways to deal with this is storage of heavy items at waist height, especially in the kitchens. Places are getting better at it. You have the heavy cans and the heavy flour, and we want to store those on the shelf at waist height rather than, where we're reaching overhead or having to get down to the floor. That can solve a lot of the problems. And systems for moving things and reasonable expectations and communicating of those expectations and best practices. Inverting a pan in a dish sink, that should have a little explanation with it. Sometimes in the kitchens, we'll have a very deep sink to be able to fit pans into it and fill pans and that sort of thing. And then somebody may also be washing dishes in those sinks. But I've seen in some places that one of the employees will actually take a metal steamer pan, turn it upside down, and now that's their new working surface inside of the sink. So they gain, maybe 6 to 12 inches, depending on the size of the pan. Garbage filters for extra large units. Now that's one of the few things I'll bring up here that is a pretty significant cost. We have seen a few districts put these in, though, for kind of the rolling garbage cans that might be, I don't know, they might be 50 to 100 gallon garbage cans. And these things can get quite heavy. And there are units out there that will automatically handle these and lift them, tilt them, and dump them. And training and proper lifting and back health should generally go with that one too. This is a little tougher one. There's something we call play with purpose, and that's mostly related to phy-ed and physical activities. We see a lot of injuries here and some pretty severe ones from coaching staff and other people who are dealing directly with physical activities with children. Our message here is lead with purpose, play to coach, not to compete. Right? So as you are playing with the children, it should really be about coaching, not about winning. And be especially careful of student-teacher events. Maybe you have a kickball event or something like that, an annual event, which is a great team builder and relationship builder, but it's also something to be careful with. So onwards to improving results through safety, leadership, and culture. And through this, we're looking for, before we did the tactics, and they're very specific and aimed at very specific items. For the safety, leadership, and culture, stepping back a little bit, and how do we install a culture of safety into a school district, and something that is hopefully more self-sustaining. These are the components. This is really what it's about. You need that top leadership and supervisor responsibility, and then all these other pieces. And if you look at these pieces and kind of boil them down, I think really most of them are about communication in some form or another. We've got hiring, training, communication, obviously that's about communication, motivation, disciplinary procedure. These are all some sort of communication pieces. And of course, then we've got hazard management, which is kind of the trends and the targets and the tactics, and assess and adjust. Top-level leadership, this is what I need from top-level leadership if we're going to be successful. There has to be goals, and there has to be a communication of those goals. And that goal may be no slips on ice and snow this year, or maybe a 10% reduction in injuries. That's a little bit more generic. I think the goals that are more specific are generally a little bit more well received. Delegate responsibilities, give them resources. A lot of times the big resource that these groups need are time or maybe authority. Sometimes it's money, but there's a lot that can be done on a low budget. Demand excellence and hold people accountable. Make sure this process is managed, basically. And one of the most important things at the top level leadership is create an infrastructure. I'll show you what I mean by that. The safety infrastructure, you need people at all these different levels that I have on this page to handle these systems. Generally, in most places, not all of these are done by one person or done by the leader. You need somebody to define the target based on injury history and potential sources. So what I showed you earlier in those charts, I would call those potential sources of major loss, because that's what we see in schools. But specifically, each of you may be a little different. Ideally, you can go to your insurance carrier and ask them to do analysis for you and say, okay, what are my targets? What are my biggest sources of loss? Or maybe they can't do that, but they could send you a loss run where you could do your own analysis on that. Say, okay, what are my targets? What are we going to work on? Then somebody needs to design solutions. How are we going to try and fix this thing? Somebody will need to delegate those solutions. Somebody needs to ensure that they're practiced, that they're implemented, that people are following through on them, whether it's behaviors or conditions that we're working on. And then we need to track and update the results, probably like on an annual basis or maybe quarterly basis. So we look at the first one and the last one here. Those might be the same person, and maybe even the second one. But the third and the fourth line items on there, the delegation and the ensuring that the solutions are practiced, what we really need there is somebody with authority, right? We need somebody that has authority in the building, that it's a recognized authority to say, so whoever is receiving the message will say, okay, this is important. This is something I have to do. Best hiring practices. Now, this will differ from industry to industry, district to district, and employee type to employee type. But ideally, we can get at least some of these things in place. Top-level interview, multiple interviews, and top-level interview. And we're not talking, just teachers here. I'm talking custodial staff, kitchen staff, everybody in the building. Can we get them a few different interviews? And can we throw in some behavior-based interview questions, such as, tell me about the worst boss you ever had in your life, or the best job you ever had in your life. I used to practice this. I had about 10 questions, and people sometimes after answering the first question, I already knew I wasn't going to hire them, because people would tell me a story about their life that they really shouldn't have told their best friend. This type of questioning can be very revealing. Make hiring employees a priority and their orientation. There's so many times I hear, boy, we really never should have hired that employee, or I wish we would have gotten rid of them when we had the chance. Once you have them, you may have them for a long, long time, and I'm sure you hope you do for your good employees. So make that a priority. Make sure you're getting the right employees. So once you have the employee in, training and orientation are a critical piece of them, and I know orientation is generally a very long process, and probably a lot of things that are hard for the employee to remember, but make sure you stress your safety and health expectations, especially the big ones: ice and snow, standing on chairs, material handling, lifting and stretching falls right in there with material handling. And the stretching is kind of a little wellness piece. How do you maintain a healthy back? Because that's, I think, a big part of it. And task training. What are the things that people learn after working here for several years that I can tell you about right now, so you don't have to learn it by trial and error? So we go through those pieces, but then the really big piece is observation and coaching to make sure that your employees are following through on the expectations. And that may not be the people on this call. It may be delegated, such to a supervisor of a different department. And I know they're not going to stand over their shoulder all day long or even spend several hours at observation and coaching. But my standard is, at a minimum, in the first hour and the first day and the first week and the first month, spend 5 minutes with a little observation, especially if there's a more hazardous task that's more critical, and a little coaching, a little talking, make sure they're comfortable, make sure they feel welcome at your place too. Causes of accidents, if you really boil it down and think about each accident, generally unsafe condition or unsafe acts. Now there are theories out there that 94% of the injuries are unsafe acts. I won't necessarily disagree with that, but I do disagree with when those unsafe acts are always directed at the employee. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a couple of minutes here. But our job is to manage both behaviors and conditions. Conditions seem a lot more easy to manage because it's there, it's black and white, it's not confrontational. Behaviors can feel confrontational, but we've got to take that confrontation out of it. So, condition or behavior. Ice and snow is a really good example for this, and I'll sometimes ask an audience, okay, it's 2 o'clock, and there's ice and snow out on the ground in front of the doors, and is that a condition or behavior? And 70–80% of the class will say, oh, that's a condition. Say, okay, I can probably agree about that. Well, let's say it's 3 o'clock now. The snow stopped at 2 o'clock, and there's still ice and snow issues out there. Condition or behavior? Well, from my perspective, that's a behavior, first, of the employee who was supposed to deal with it and never did deal with it. And if that happens a couple of times, okay, it's that employee's behavior, but it's actually now the supervisor's behavior, because the supervisor is not observing, coaching, and enforcing, which is one thing a supervisor really needs to do. And if it's still happening, then now we need to start talking about the top leader of the organization. Maybe the top leader doesn't have a plan. Say, hey, this is Wisconsin. We're going to have ice and snow. Just be careful out there. This is a top leader behavior who is now responsible for this condition that is very likely to cause accidents. So conditions of the workplace with a plan for control that is not followed, behavior of the employee or the supervisor, and those are our targets, I guess I'll have to say, for changing this condition. If there's no plan for control other than be careful, or there's a lackadaisical plan, and there's a plan but nobody really needs to follow it, now we look at top leadership that needs to change how they're going to approach this. So a hazardous situation. I would say, what's wrong with this picture? And there's obviously a person standing on a chair. And we could add to that and say, well, she's leaning forward and trying to get a heavy box above her shoulders, and there's quite a few things going on here. But really, as soon as she steps up on that chair, that is a hazardous situation. And why would she do something like that? There's a number of reasons. Maybe there's not a standard communicated. Maybe there is, but there's not a ladder in the near area. And generally, a lot of times you'll hear, trying to save time. There wasn't a ladder in the area, only going up there for a second. It's not that bad, and that sort of thing. But do you think she knows the rule? In most districts, I would hope so. And if she doesn't in your district, it's very critical that you communicate these rules and these standards. And you wonder if it's their first time. I would say I doubt it. I would think this goes on fairly often. And then the other question, the last question on this, are the leaders aware, that this happens from time to time? And I would hope they are. So this points kind of to the whole system of communication, observing, coaching, enforcing, leadership. By the way, if you guys have any questions, I do suggest that you write them into the question box, and we will get to those. So what's the message? This kind of dovetails in with the prior slide. When a supervisor or leader walks by an employee improperly lifting without saying anything, or doesn't do it properly herself, the message is that the rules don't matter. And the rules have to matter if you're going to try and reduce injuries, because the rules are there really to reduce those injuries, not to make everybody's life difficult. Hey, and communication, slips, trips, and falls. Start a campaign. Now, the company I work for, we have loads and loads of materials, especially on winter trips and falls, but also non-winter slips, trips, and falls. And we like to keep things in front of people and make sure they're thinking about them. So a campaign could be postings, emails, announcements, communications, and just try and get it in front of everyone everywhere. Think of it like a McDonald's commercial. We all know whether we like McDonald's or not. We all know what McDonald's is. But we all see, I would bet, 50 to 100 McDonald's commercials a year. Kind of like slips, trips, and falls. We all know what ice is. We all know that it's slippery and that we could fall on it. But we want to keep it in front of people so people are thinking about it every day. And there could be a campaign on ice and snow, and then there could be a campaign on cords and stairs, and then a campaign on stairs, or on strains, I'm sorry, and keep these safety campaigns in front of people. Okay, and then there has to be some specific hazard management, and I would like to see places inspect for hazards occasionally, watch for them daily. So I'm a realist. I know not every day are you going to have somebody out there walking the floors, doing a safety inspection. That's not expected, and it's probably actually not very productive. Occasionally, yes, there should be a full-fledged safety inspection. But every day, people, especially the leaders, should be watching for these hazards, including the behaviors, and recognize the hazards. Some things really don't look that hazardous. We've got that cord on the ground and think, it's just a cord. It's always there. Nobody's tripped on it yet. Doesn't seem that hazardous. Recognize that as a true hazard, and that in the business I'm in, we see people have very, very significant life-changing injuries from simple things like that. And control hazards. It might be environmental or engineering. It might be some sort of administrative type item. But a big part of controlling hazards is that observation, coaching, and enforcement. Okay, I'm getting close to wrapping up here, so if you got any questions, please get them in. Also look at your insurance carrier, what they can do for you. There's a lot of different models in insurance carriers. And they each have their benefits, and there's reasons why each different carrier does different things. You have carriers that are all the way from completely hands-off. They'll pay your claims, but that's about all you'll get. And you don't have one dedicated claims rep. You have maybe 10 that when you call, you never know who you will get. And for some districts, that's what they want. They don't want any bells and whistles, and that's fine. You can go all the way to the other end for a place that has something similar to what you see on the slide here, dedicated loss prevention services and self-service resources and dedicated claims adjusters. And then there's companies that operate in between there. And then even the companies that have all of these things, you will find a little bit different approaches too. And that some will be very much, break down the doors and we're going to make you safe even if you don't want to be safe, and some that are more of a cooperative type approach. And that's, you have to decide kind of what is going to work for you and what you need and what you want. And if you want these things, make sure you're talking to your agent and you have at least access to these things or the opportunity. So lastly, to wrap up my piece of this, if you want to make change, these are the things you need to do. Accept responsibility. Accept that these things can be changed. Again, with what I do, I see places that change, that have very, very poor injury histories, that move on, and generally without spending a lot of money. It's more of a culture thing, that move forward and reduce their injuries and lower their mod and save themselves some money. Communicate. A lot of this, what I've talked about today, is about communications. Set expectations, delegate responsibility, manage behaviors, and that might not be the behavior of the employee, it might be the behavior of the boss. Really, really look out for those slip and trip hazards. They're our #1 cost of injury in our insurance company. Follow through, and those are the things you do to control your cost of comp. I have one more thing here, one announcement for an upcoming webinar. Kathy mentioned this earlier, effectively managing workers' compensation claims. It's going to be a webinar much like this, February 9th from noon to 1 o'clock. So I appreciate you guys' time today. I'll hold on for just a half minute or so to see if any questions come in. So other than that, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you learned something from your hour today. One last note, the PowerPoint and recording of this will be emailed out to each of you in a few days. So if there's something that you want to follow up on, you will get a copy of this. Okay, thanks again for your time, everyone. I really appreciate you joining me on this webinar, and hopefully we can do this again someday. Thanks.